Welcome to the Business Brains and BS podcast, the podcast for people building businesses, battling their own brains, and occasionally stepping in a little BS along the way. So, today our episode is going to focus on, oh dear God, what have I done? And what I mean by that is many of our listeners have taken that leap and started their own business, and whether it's coming from working for somebody else or starting from scratch, there are times in a business owner's life where they feel like maybe they've stepped in it. So Greg, I can't imagine you ever felt that way, did you?
More than once. And it comes in stages, there's like that initial, I think about it like I think most people probably start out pretty optimistic when they start a business. I mean, because why would you start it if you weren't optimistic? And so it's that first big challenge, where you second guess yourself. And then, and maybe other people have had better experiences. I know for me, there's been, a time or two along the way as well. Um, so yeah, I think it hits kinda in different points in the business's life, with that first being, maybe it's a month in, maybe it's a year in, but, like, there's, like, kinda that once the new wears off. Like, in my business, we talk about kinda like the honeymoon period. You make the big change and, everything's great, and then, there's actually a model called the stages of recovery for people that are, trying to, deal with an addiction, and the first stage is that honeymoon stage, like, I feel great, everything's going well, and then the next stage, they call it we call it the wall. Like, you get and it could be different for different people. For some people, it's gonna be, like, maybe something happens, like, a loss of some kind or, some really stressful event or whatever, or it could be another it could be a good thing even, like, when you're talking about recovery, it could be like, a blowout New Year's Eve party, but whatever it is, you face that first challenge, and then you run smack into the wall and you go down, or you figure out a way to get over it, right? So that's when I think about that, like, everybody starts in that honeymoon optimistic, and sooner or later, you're gonna hit the wall, and then, yeah, that's when that, like, "Oh, what did I do? This might have been a mistake," you know?
Yeah, and it's so funny you say that because I think back to when I first made the transition from corporate America to buying my franchise, and I remember talking to my mom about it, and she said, "I remember when you were a kid and you got excited, you would like get up on your toes." And she said, "That's the same sense, that's the same feeling I get from you about this new business venture." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, that's cool, that's exciting, that's great." And then I flew to Vegas. I went through my training, and I got back from that, and suddenly it wasn't just a wall. I mean, it was like the Tower of Babel, right? It went to the sky, and it was all around me, right? And at that point, I just I froze. I was paralyzed, and it was almost like I just laid down and waited for the wall to fall on me, and that was so terrifying. I can remember waking up in the middle of the night, um, with like pool of sweat in my chest and just worrying about, are we going to be okay? I joke around about it, but are we going to end up living in a refrigerator box under an overpass because I made this decision and I've totally ruined not only my life but everybody else's, which is totally unrealistic, right? Because I could have always gone back and gotten a job. And I'll be interested to hear your take on this. The thing that I found for me and for every business owner I've worked with is when I or when they are in that situation has been motion. We joke around, we're called action coach, not think about it coach. It's been, okay, let's figure out. You don't even have to necessarily figure out what you need to do. Just sometimes you just got to get up and go do something. And as you're doing something, either you're going to realize that this isn't the right thing to be doing, or some things are going to start falling into place. And there's that saying, what is it? Luck is hard work residue. And I think there's a lot of validity to that because so many of us, I think, get into that position where maybe it's fear of failure, maybe it's fear of the unknown, maybe it's imposter syndrome, that we've talked about before, and it just paralyzes us and we get stuck. So, when you started your business, did you have a similar experience, or was yours maybe a little bit different?
Um, well, like I was saying earlier, there was a lot of optimism at first, but also some pressure right out of the gate because um, we did a lot of downsizing, like big financial hit to make that move. And I had decided that I wasn't going to pay myself a dime for the first 6 months, and I had 6 months worth of living expenses saved up. Um, and what I told myself is if I can't pay myself anything after 6 months, this was probably the wrong decision. Um, what I didn't know at the time was that 6 months was gonna go by and I would be able to afford to pay myself something, but it was gonna be a struggle, and it wasn't gonna be a lot. And so, like, in a way, I met my challenge of give yourself a paycheck at the end of 6 months, but it wasn't kinda what I hoped, you know? Um, and then it was like, the next year of just what I told you when I met you, trying to outrun the bank account, you know? And, um, and it's like questioning for me, there was a element of, like, questioning what I believed about myself. I thought I was this person who could do this thing. Was I wrong? Was I naive? Is there something I'm missing? You talk about in some of you when I've done your workshops and stuff. One of the things you talk about is who do I have to be to get what I want? So it's kind of questioning that. Maybe I'm not the person I have to be to do this, um, which of course is not a good feeling, you know. Um, and figuring that side of it out, and um, so a lot of self analysis, So it's not just like, is this not going to work out, but is it like, am I not who I thought I was? Um, and that can be tough. And I know we did an episode, fairly recently about a perseverance, but I feel like when that really kicks in, and like you said, taking action, um, increasing your knowledge base, because there's so much you don't know when you start something like that. Um, So, yeah, lots of things you have to do, but for me, it's like a lot of looking in the mirror, talking to my wife, you know, um, reminding myself of some things that I've done in the past and, you know, um, so yeah, lots of stuff, but yes, definitely experienced some of that early on.
Yeah. Well, and I like what you said about having the 6 months worth of living expenses saved up because I think it's important to plan that way, because, yeah, it more than likely not gonna be an overnight success, right? And there's value in knowing that you have 6 months worth of living expenses, set aside. I had a nice, package that I got when I left corporate America, which allowed me to. Honestly, I think it helped me, but it also hurt me because, I didn't have that sense of desperation because that's something that people can feel, right? If you're sitting across from a potential, client, customer, prospect, whatever it might be, and you really need this sale, it will come across in your voice, in the tone of voice, in your nonverbals, whatever it might be. So there's that value of having that that safety net there to say, okay, I can go in here with confidence, knowing that my family's still going to be able to eat tomorrow if this deal falls through. At the same time, that safety net can also kind of hold you back and give you a sense of false security, so to speak. It's like, well, everything's going to be okay. So if I don't get up and go make cold calls, if I don't figure out how to do whatever this marketing initiative is, excuse me, it's going to be okay because we're still going to be able to eat. So it can be a little bit of a blessing and a curse, but I definitely think it makes more sense to have that than to just quit cold turkey, walk out with one more paycheck come in and say I'm going to go start my business and make this thing happen. Um, but yeah, but I think every business owner has that struggle, unless even if they've started it as kind of a side hustle and built it up, right? And I don't know that many people who've built. I think that used to be a thing in the past where people would have a full time job and then build a side hustle on the side, but Thinking of the business owners I know now, I don't know too many who have done that. Can you think of anybody?
Not off the top of my head. I know for me, that seemed like an impossibility. The role I was in, the job I had, I was, in management and had a lot of responsibilities, and I still was, take pride in my work. So part of having 6 months worth of expenses saved up was a lot of preparation, I decided I was gonna make that move a year before I actually did it. It took me a year to get my ducks in a row, to so that I would, have a chance at survival, and so that was my plan all along is we're gonna do the downsizing, we're gonna make sure we have money in the bank, um and then pull the plug on the other job and start the new thing. Could and because when I thought about every time I sat and thought about trying to do both, trying to keep my job and do a side hustle, um, I thought there's only so much of me and only so many hours in the day, and if I try to do this, I'm either gonna not give enough to this new thing to give it a good shot, or I'm gonna start to, my current job is gonna start to suffer to where for sure, I'm not gonna be satisfied with my job performance, and quite possibly, my bosses are gonna stop being satisfied with my job performance, and then that's gonna create a new set of problems, and then regardless of which side is suffering, my own personal well-being and my family well-being is definitely gonna suffer because 'cause I'm not gonna be home ever, I'm never gonna have time to rest, so, for me, when I thought it through, I was just like, "Yeah, it wouldn't work to try to do both." So I'm gonna keep doing this, get my ducks in a row, and then just pull the plug and make the new move. I remember when I talked to my boss and, told him, that I was leaving and what I was gonna be doing, he initially, had this, reaction to try to negotiate, see if there's a way to keep me there. But then when I had told him everything I had set up, like, like we got an apartment, different things like that, he started to try to kinda negotiate with me, and then he's like, "You already got an apartment," like, he realized, like, it's done, you know? Um, so, yeah, I don't know if it's just because the culture's changed or what, but, yeah, I know for me that wasn't an option, and I think you're right, like, the people I know seems like they just kinda do it.
Yeah, because I've listened to educational, content that's talked about if you're going to do that, build your side hustle up to a point where you're making the same amount of money that you're making from your salary, and then it's time to make that transition. But I don't think that people do that anymore. So let me ask you this, because I will say, and this is kind of embarrassing to admit as a business coach, that I came out of training and had a loose idea of what I was gonna do to try to grow my business, but I really hadn't thought about, what is my plan? What is my marketing? What are the activities that I'm going to hold myself accountable to engage in on a daily, weekly, monthly basis so that this business does grow. So when you hung up your shingle on day 1, did you have a clear plan of these are the things I'm gonna do to make this business a success, or were you just kinda making it up as you went along like I was?
Yes and no. I had some plans, but they were kinda uninformed or ignorant or, like, kinda naive maybe is a good word, kinda naive plans. Like, I'll give you an example. When I started, my thought was I wasn't gonna take insurance, self-pay only. Sounds great on paper. After a couple months of not getting very many clients and having a bunch of conversations on the phone that ended with, "Do you take this insurance?" "No." "Oh, sorry, I need some," I finally was like, "Okay, I gotta take insurance." Um, so that's an example of, like, I was just kinda, I think, kinda idealistic and naive and had to learn what life in the real world was like, and that's the reason people have health insurance. When if they have it, they wanna use it, and so they wanna find a provider that's gonna take it, I get it. Um, which means a little bit more headache on my end, which is why I wanted to avoid it, but you gotta do what you gotta do. Um, so I mean, I had some thoughts, marketing was another thing, like, I had some ideas of what I was gonna do for marketing, but there came a point where those ideas weren't enough, and gotta figure out some new things, and, um, And then, yeah, then there was things that I didn't even think about at all. How taxes affect compensation,
Right.
stuff like that.
Well, yeah, you
Yeah,
don't think
and,
about
like,
the insurance and all
the
those
idea
other
that, like,
things, yeah.
"Wait, wait a second, I get taxed twice?" Like, I pay myself, and so, I get taxed as the employer, and then I get taxed as the employee? That doesn't seem
Uh,
fair. Like, yeah, a
um
lot of stuff you gotta learn.
Yeah, well, and I think that's really important is, we talk about, DGLPA. So it's D stands for dream, right? So what's the dream? And then off of the dream, you build the goal. So DG, dream goal. But then you have to learn, and I think that's one of the places that until recently I've kind of fallen short because you gotta learn about the things that you need to do, and I think learn could also kinda have a parentheses and tie in the B as well that you just talked about, right? What do I need to learn and who do I need to become in order to achieve that goal to ultimately get that dream? So you got dream, goal, learn, plan, act. So very often, I think we tend to say, okay, I've got this idea, I've got this goal, I'm going to take action. But if we haven't stopped and said, okay, in order to be successful, what does my definition of success look like here? All right. So, in order to achieve that level of success, how am I going to get there? What's that plan? What are the things I'm going to need, and what are the things I'm going to need to learn? And early on, for most of us, when we start our business, we don't have a whole lot of extra resources there to go bring somebody on. So, you and I both had to learn how to successfully network, right? I mean, there's a big difference in me in corporate America going, to an event where I'm with all of my peers and we all have a similar experience, similar knowledge base, whatever it might be, or going into the customers we called on, right? That was part of the job versus, okay, now I've got to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to be at a 7 o'clock networking event with a bunch of people I don't know who have a bunch of different businesses and do a bunch of different things. So you had to learn how to do that, and you had to learn that you don't just immediately walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, do you own a business? Do you have a coach? You need a coach. You should let me coach you," right? Because nobody wants to talk to that guy. And you had to learn about, okay, social media and a website and all of those different things. So if you're looking at making that break, if you can say, "All right, how much of this can I go ahead and get under my belt now and understand now?" Because I do see a lot of people who start their own business. They meet somebody who does social media marketing. They pay them a lot of money for a website and SEO, so on and so forth. And then they don't get anything out of it because they didn't learn enough about SEO, about social media, about websites, about all of those things to make sure that they were hiring somebody who would do a good job.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a lot you have to learn, and, at least in my case, and I'm sure it's for everybody, there was a lot of learning that happened
Mm,
before day 1 of the business. Um, you know, when I think about my own career journey, I think, on paper I think I've said this before on here, on paper, I could have started this business 10 years before I did. Um, but having time, especially the time I had in management roles, that really helped. I didn't understand all of what owning a business was like, but I understood some things. Enough of the and I understood some of the behind the scenes, and that helped me. Um, you know, I recently talked to a therapist who was wanting to start their own business, but didn't have that management experience. And so I'm asking her questions that to me are very simple, like regulatory, contractual type questions that she had no idea. Like, and but thinking back, I was like, that's because I spent those years in management where I had to deal with that stuff, and she's never done that, you know. Um, so there was the learning that took place before. For me, early on, books, reading books was really helpful because, like you said, in that position, I didn't have the money to pay somebody, but I can buy a book for $10, and so, um, and I'm a big like, I get online and search, and so I'm not just grabbing random books. I'm like, what are the best books for a new business owner ever written, you know, and like looking for stuff like that and found some pretty helpful things. You know, I've said it on here before, you've mentioned it on here before, but man, a huge one when I think about it. The book, The E Myth Revisited, I read that early on. That was so helpful. I've read it again since, um, and it hits different, you know, being further in and more established, but that helped me so much thinking about how I needed to kind of set things up. Um, you know, meeting people and learning from other people. You talked about like about a year in, I learned like networking, and like I, I, I don't know if I could have told you exactly what networking meant other than shaking hands with people at some corny event, like
Right.
you know, before I started a business. But I was to the point that I knew my current marketing campaign wasn't gonna suffice. Um, and so, okay, what do I do? And found a local networking group. You know, that's how you and I met. We've shared that before. And I remember when I first started going to that, I was like, dude, so one of a book that I read early on that was really helpful, and I know I've mentioned it on here before, and you've mentioned it on here before, but the book, The E Myth Revisited, was so helpful early on, and you know, and I've even read it since, and it's helpful again. It hits differently when you're more established, and but yeah, early on that helped me a lot with trying to figure out how to structure certain things. That's just one example. So, I mean, I was reading, you know, watching, listening to podcasts, and then I start trying to network and meeting people, because reading is great, but it's not real world experience that's directly tied to me, you know? And so, when I started doing like the networking thing, I felt like I was on the remedial track, like I was getting 0 credits for this for my year in here or whatever. Um, but it was really helpful, you know, it was a big learning process, and so that put me around other business owners and business professionals who were really good at it. There were people that were really good at this networking thing, and I could try to learn from them, as well as more established business owners that I could learn from, you know, and then, that's how we met, you know? And then later on, it became, like, actually hiring someone to work specifically with me, you know, and even at the time, and this goes into, you know, if you wanna be successful early on, sometimes you gotta spend a little money to make money, and, I've shared this on here before too, but I didn't think I could afford your services when you and I met, and I remember you told me, you said, "Give it 90 days and just see if it pays for itself." And if it doesn't, no hard feelings, and I did the math and figured out that 3 payments to you was not gonna break the bank. It was more than I wanted to spend, but it wasn't gonna put me out of business, and I was like, "Okay, I'll give it a shot," and it did, it paid for itself, um, so much, and that was 6 years ago, I think, and we're still, you know, here together, so obviously it paid off, um but yeah, so it came in stages, but just that learning, do what you can, pick up information where you can as you go, and don't stop, you know? When if you get access to, like, that next level, take it, you know, and keep going. Um, yeah, learning is, man, crucial.
Yeah. Well, and I like what you just said as far as you get access to that next level, take it. Because as you start to hit the next level, you still got to learn, but you can start asking yourself who, not how, right? So instead of figuring out now, how am I going to get this done? You can figure out, all right, who can I bring on board to do this for me? Now, you still need to learn enough to be able to make an informed decision, right? If you're going to bring on a bookkeeper, you probably need to know some general bookkeeping knowledge to make sure that you're hiring somebody who actually understands, what a chart of accounts is, and whether you're going to be running your books on a cash or accrual basis, things along those lines. So you can ask some informed questions. And, I think we are in a golden age here of having a resource that those who came before us didn't, and that's AI. I have been amazed with some of the things that I've been able to do with AI now, as far as creating plans, not just current, but long term, and being able to set it up to have a conversation with it, because so many people just jump on and say, I need, whatever it might be, and they just type that in there. Sorry, not a very good analogy there, or a very good reference, but they just type it in and then take whatever it gets. And I've recently learned to give it as much information as you possibly can. Tell it that you need it to write a prompt for you, and then ask it what additional information it needs. And by doing that, you start having a conversation with it. It generates a prompt that is so much more detailed and so much better than anything I ever wrote. I copy it, I open a new chat, and I put it in there, and then I start having a conversation with that. And I have been amazed at how much I've learned, and I've been amazed at, some of the ideas that, it kinda gave me a foundation on, that I've now been able to take and grow on, and it's given me some different, perspective on some things that I haven't had before either. So I think AI is definitely one of the opportunities, but then I think the other opportunity you're talking about too here is having mentors, having people who are successful, who've gone before you, who can help you, find the way. I used to always, I learned this from my dad. I used to tell it to my kids. I still tell it to my kids. A wise man, a smart man learns from his own mistakes. A wise man learns from the mistakes of others, right? And I think when you get to that point where you're at that level where you can take that next step, bringing others in around you who are further ahead than you, who have more experience than you, who have a different perspective than you, can really help you take that next step faster, and it can be a bigger step as well. Yeah. So as you've continued to grow, right? Because you go from the oh crap, what have I done? When you start this thing, to all right, now I'm to a point where it's time to scale. What have been some of the oh crap thoughts that have popped into your head at the scaling point?
But yeah, well, I mean, the first one was bringing on another therapist. I didn't take into account everything that was gonna be involved with that, and it was a good therapist that I like working with, she's still with me to this day, but, I don't know, I just had it in my head that, again, like, financially, it was gonna be so it I was just gonna it was just easy math, like, I'm gonna pay her this much, and what's left is gonna come to me, right? And, no, there's some more variables in there, and, initially wasn't as, lucrative as I thought it was gonna be. Um, so that was one. We're like, "Yeah, wait, is this the right move?" You know? Um, and then figuring out how to make that work, and then, um, man, so many yes, so many things along the way. And then I've made the mistake of trying to too much too soon, too fast, biting off more than I could kinda chew at the moment. Done that, and that's one of those moments where like, "Dang it, man, like, was this was might have been a mistake," you know? Um, and that it's like I talked about it a while ago, then it gets into, like, I thought I would be able to kill it at this. This move was gonna work, and this was gonna be the outcome, and now it's not working out the way I thought it was. Am I not as smart as I thought I was? Am I doing something wrong? Um, so yeah, it's with scale has come some of that as well for sure. And you've mentioned this before, like maybe sometimes it is to take a step back, so that you can take more steps forward. Um, that's, happened a time or two as well. Um, yeah, it's not, I don't know if this is good or bad, but I feel like I handle those situations a little better so it doesn't hit quite like the, "Oh, crap, this was a terrible mistake." It's like, "This sucks, but I've been in the sucky position before. There is a way out. I just gotta do it," you know? Um, so, yeah, I guess maybe it gets a little easier over time. Um, I don't know if that's just building up a tolerance to a bad thing or if it's learning that, probably maybe a little bit of both. But yeah, it doesn't quite sting as bad as it used to.
Well, and I think it goes back to the experience, right? So you have had that experience, which you didn't fail, you learned. and then you've had the mentorship, you've got the community working with you. So I think it's a perfect example of how continuing to focus on learning, right? Being a lifelong learner, um, and surrounding yourself with people who can help mentor and help you work through things, right? Because being a business owner can be so lonely. And then when you throw in, especially going back to that very beginning, right? If things aren't going well and it's lonely and you feel like a failure and you think maybe I'm not the person I thought I was, if you keep that all inside, which for the most part was what I did because I think it was a fear of failure and a fear of being, found out or whatever it is. I mean, that will eat you alive, right? So being able to say, okay, and I loved what you said because that's actually kind of what helped me through it too, is I've been through much harder challenges than the one I'm dealing with right now. And I survived those. I found a way out. So it comes back to stopping and looking at, okay, where am I now? Where do I want to go? What what route do I need to take? And that route may change, right? It's just like if you're driving a car someplace and there's construction, you may have to detour, but then figuring out, okay, what's the first step I need to take? What's the first road I need to turn on? And then starting that progress or starting that action. Good
It's
friend of mine used to tell me all the time, you can't steer a parked car, right? So I think
mhm.
it goes back to taking that action.
Yeah, I think it's looking in both directions. Yeah, you have to take action and figure out what comes next. Um, Also, I've found in those moments, it's also really helpful to remember, why I wanted to do this to begin with, and who I am, what it is about me that made this happen, you know? Um, just recently, I kinda had that. I was, um, kind of evaluating some things and considering some next steps, and, um I haven't talked about it much on here, but I have a regular meditation practice, and I lead a weekly meditation group, there through the business, and, um, in my meditation practice, one of the things I was trying to identify is what is, like, pure and natural and true for me, about me, who I really am, and one of the things that occurred to me is I am a guy who likes to go for it. If I think this is a cool thing, I wanna go. I wanna try. I wanna do it, and I'd rather try and fail than not try and have the regret and wonder what if, and and that really resonated with me, and I could look back over my life and see where I've done that over, and sometimes it's worked and sometimes it hasn't, you know? Um, but that was even that's reassuring to where I could look at the times where it didn't work out and it didn't change that aspect of my personality. And that felt made me feel better, with the business stuff currently, it's like some of these things I wanna work towards, some of these ideas, go for it. If it doesn't work out, hey, I told my wife, I said, "I've only been homeless once, and that was by my own, choice, so I think I can avoid being homeless again." So, um, we'll be alright, you know? So, yeah, it's like figuring out what you need to do next and everything, but don't forget who you are and why you got into this to begin with.
Yeah. Well, and you made me it kind of as you were going through that, it made me think about the fact that as the business starts to scale and grow, it's so important for the business owner to work on themselves, like you're talking about, right? That meditation, that focus, um, also to make sure that they're taking time away from the business for personal to recharge, but also finding that time to protect, to think, just to think, to do nothing else, and I encourage business owners, if you can, close the door, put a sign on it that says, unless the building's on fire, leave me alone. In a perfect world, go somewhere else, go to your spot that makes you creative. If taking a walk in the woods opens your mind up, go do that. If sitting by a pond opens your mind up, go do that. Sitting in a deer blind, if that helps you just kind of decompress. And because I found that when you can kind of get the stresses of the business and life out of your brain and just kind of, you know, let it all be, it's amazing some of the things that start to pop into your head.
Yeah, totally, totally. I agree with you 100% on that for sure.
So, yep. Yeah, so I think it's really all about just having that clarity of where you want to go, kind of that, that dream, goal, learn, plan, act. And I think if people who are thinking about starting a business or people who find themselves in a business that's not doing what they want it to do, or even people who found themselves in business and it is going well, if they'll take the time to stop and focus on those five things, it's amazing the impact that that can have on the business. So all right. Well, that should do it for this episode of the Business Brains and BS podcast. Remember, progress beats perfection. Hope is not a strategy, but it is a necessity. And the BS that tends to hold us back usually starts in our own heads. If you enjoyed this episode, follow the show on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Leave us a rating and make sure that you share this with a business owner who you think needs to hear it too. So until next time, we'll see you.